What would I consider the worst day ever in my adoptive life? When I was 15, my parents were really struggling with a lot of fights between my two younger siblings, me and them. My dad sat us down. You can either choose us or you can choose the world. He took this idea from Joshua, where Joshua asked the people of Israel in the Old Testament, you can serve the Lord or you can serve the gods of the country which you came from, but as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. So my dad asked us, do you want to be in our household? Do you not? And 15-year-old me did not desire to leave. I was content, even though I wasn't always happy. I didn't want to leave their house. So I said, well, I'm a hunter, I'm staying. And my sisters were like, maybe not. In their creativity, packed a bag in order to run away. And they packed it full of like all sorts of supplies, you know, a first aid kit, clothing, food, everything they could gather in their minds that would help them escape. I knew about the bag, but I didn't tell my parents because I thought they're not gonna really run away, and I was correct. They stuffed the bag under one of their beds and they were not actually going to walk out the door. Unfortunately, my mom discovered the bag, and because the previous week I had said I want to be a hunter and I want to stay a part of this household, my parents took my not telling them as a personal betrayal, and they told me I had to write a letter to my biological great-grandfather asking him to take me back. My grandfather and my grandparents had decided that they were not healthy enough to take care of me when I was 6 years old, and they had passed us to another family, and we'd gone through multiple households until moving to our adopted household. So 15-year-old me sat down, wrote the worst letter of my life, explaining that I could no longer live with the hunters and I needed them to take me back because I had nowhere else to go. The next day, I went to church and I saw my best friend, and I was super upset. So I told my best friend, you can't tell anyone, but my parents are trying to get rid of me. And I told my best friend. My best friend was horrified and told her parents, who were also horrified. And within a week, the church elders had called my parents and told them that they had taken a covenant to take us and had promised to be our parents. And by giving us back to our grandparents, they, like our biological family, they were violating their covenant between us, the church, and God. And so they were not allowed to return us. And the church they were in was part of a cult. So that said, don't agree with things, but that is the one good thing that church did, was tell them that they couldn't return us to our biological family when times got hard. 6 months later, so my dad asked if they had ever wronged us, and I started to actually sob because in my mind they had lied. They had promised us a home, a family, and then they always made it conditional on our good behavior. It is hard to be an adoptive parent, but do not rescind the care of your children because you don't think they... When I was a 3 or 4 year old, my biological parents' parental rights were severed. My legal guardian was in the North Carolina foster system as my foster guardian. But when I got to Texas, my new home, they didn't like me. They were very abusive. It was very, very bad. And she kept wanting to get rid of me. But Texas CPS wouldn't have anything to do with me because in Texas law, the parental rights were not severed. And then when I was given to my fourth home, which was my mom and dad, they were never able to file for actual legal custody of me because they only had power of attorney and they never had like the legal right to me according to the state of Texas. So, I'm glad I didn't live with my foster mom in Texas most of my life because she was evil, but I'm also wish that my adopted parents had had actual CPS intervention to stop them from their religious practices that were extremely harmful to me and my siblings. The weirdest things about being adopted by a family in a cult is that the cult itself didn't think adoption was a good thing because of some verses in Exodus that talk about the sins of the father being passed down to the 3rd and 4th generation. So the head of the cult, Bill Gothard, would teach that adoption, you didn't want to adopt because you're bringing kids into your home and you don't know what kind of curses are brought down from generation to generation. So when my parents got me, they were very aware of this. They invited the church elders over to our house and I was like, what is going on? And they pulled out a bottle of oil and poured oil all over my head, anointed my head with oil, and told me that all the generational curses were now gone and I didn't have to worry about anything that had ever happened to me. And that's not really how abuse works. You do have to deal with both the emotional and physical and legal consequences of abuse, but instead of doing that, they anointed my head with oil and thought everything was good and it would all be grand. So one of my favorite childhood stories is the weekend I first met my adoptive parents. They were watching me for 3 days. I thought they were just babysitting me. And on Sunday night, they decided to go to church, and I had been going to an Assemblies of God church for 4 years. So The church they were going to was a Baptist church, and when they pulled into the parking lot, I said, I can't go to this church because Baptists go to hell. And they were like, no, Elizabeth, Baptists are Christians too. And I was like, really though? Are they? 10-year-old me was very skeptical. And then when we walked into the church, the pastor asked during the worship service, because it was evening, if anybody had a special, which was a song that you could sing, like voluntarily sing. And I raised my hand and said, well, I'm special. And my parents were very embarrassed and was like, she doesn't know how to sing, it's fine. And then while the pastor was preaching, he was preaching from the King James, and I had an NIV Bible, and I very loudly whispered to my future parents, this man is not reading the Bible, he's making up new words. So I made this TikTok earlier using the "it must be so confusing for a little girl" sound, and then it reminded me of the story that I really rarely tell. So from the age of 6 to 8, I lived with my foster family, and they had a teenage son who routinely abused me. Every time I would tell people about it, I was just told that I was demon possessed and etc., that I was making up stories about him. And they did go to a very charismatic Assemblies of God church where people spoke in tongues, and their son was in the youth group and was very well respected. So every Sunday when they would have like prayer time, I would pray that he would get caught, that he would get in trouble so that he could leave me alone. And then when I was 8, he actually was riding his bike and got hit by a car and broke both of his legs. And he couldn't walk for like 6 months. He was in a wheelchair, and everybody at church was super upset about it. I was sitting in my pew knowing that I had prayed that God would punish him, so God answered my prayers. I was special. Several of you commented on my rehoming video that me being passed around from person to person sounds highly illegal. And you're right. Part of the problem is I don't know who my official legal guardian was. When I was in college, in order to apply for like federal student aid with FAFSA, because I was in the foster care system, I had to prove that I was in the foster care system. Who should I ask? I should call Wayne County, North Carolina, where I was born, and ask for the paperwork. I call Wayne County, and she says, and I kid you not, the accent is like my favorite part of the story. Oh dear. We expunged those records when you turned 18. We don't have any of those records in the courthouse right now. But I would like to know, like, who my legal guardian was, and I need his paperwork for college. This is my life. I would really like those records. But unfortunately, it appears I will never have them because the state policy is to destroy them. If I didn't ask for those papers before I turned 18, yours truly doesn't get a copy. Hello from my messy morning hair. Someone who knew me in college commented, didn't I go by Faith in school, or didn't people call me Faith? And that's true. I did go by my first legal name, which is Faith, but there's a whole story behind that. When I was 20, I legally changed my legal first name from Elizabeth to Faith Elizabeth. Parents were like, yo, y'all should change your name to Faith, Hope, and Charity. I turned 20 first because I'm the oldest, and I was like, hey sisters, hey, are y'all gonna change your names? And they said, yeah, we'll change our names. We paid money, we changed my name. Then I'm like 23 years old in college, and I'm like, why? Faith is not my name. My name is Elizabeth. It's definitely a cult thing, you know, like super religious name changes because we were adopted and that was something God wanted us to do. And my friend was like, Elizabeth, just go by Elizabeth. Just tell people my name is Elizabeth. I do have one friend that always calls me Faith / like spell the word / Elizabeth, and that's the only person who's allowed to call me Faith. Everybody else, it's Elizabeth. How did my parents find me? Like, how did rehoming happen for me? I was in my 3rd home. That home was not good for me. They really despised me as a person, even though I was a 7-year-old child. The person in charge shaved my head, but pretty much every day I can recall this woman saying to me, Elizabeth, I'm gonna find you another home. I don't want you in my household. So when I'm about 8 years old, this woman's child, her oldest daughter, gets married. There is lots of people at the wedding, and there's this woman named, we'll give them fake names. Michelle is at the wedding. So Michelle is like, oh, this adorable redhead whose head is shaved. Needs a new home. When she drives back home, she talks to her next door neighbor who ends up being my future mom, and she says, I know a kid who needs a new home. She told my future mom to call my foster mother, and after many phone calls back and forth, my foster mother drove me to Dallas to my new home and dropped me off, and that is how I was rehomed. No like supervision with the state, nothing. It was just these 2 women who just talked to each other on the phone and were just like, I'm getting rid of a child, and my mom was like, I will take a child. Whenever I tell people that I was rehomed and not adopted and that I was lost while in state custody, people are shocked. They think, or they tell me, how can this be legal? How could this have happened? And the answer is, I don't know, but I do know that it keeps happening to other kids. In 2020, over 2,000 children in state custody in Texas were lost. This 2000 number is about 5% of all kids in state custody. Now, some of these kids did age out of the system. They just lost the paperwork. Others were sex trafficked and labor trafficked. And sometimes CPS has no idea what happened. Were they taken out of state? Are they with a distant relative? CPS just does not know. I do love the fact that CPS in Texas has been sued over this. This is an 11-year lawsuit that they keep losing kids. And I love the quote from the judge. Oh, for God's sake, I don't understand the incompetence. You don't know where the children are. And the fact is, Texas state custody is like, yeah, we don't know where the kids are. They don't have an answer. And I'm not the only one that it's happened to, so.
We're sorry. You have reached a number that has been disconnected or is no longer in service.